But yeah, do we want to do another round of introductions before we get started?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that since it is a little more than 5 after. I think I know everybody here, but I'll kind of kick us off by saying that the shoe store does maintain a recording of the stuff that happens on Zoom, and it does get posted to our YouTube page. If anybody's uncomfortable with your image or conversation being used, you have two options. One, either keep yourself on mute because the active screen is the only thing that gets recorded. So one option is just mute yourself, or the other option is send a message to myself or Jared, just requesting that this discussion not be posted. And your request for anonymity will of course be honored and we won't post it. And that's just fine. But I'm Amber. I've worked at the shoe store on and off since the mid-90s. And I'm really excited to talk about this book with some other folks.
I'm Jeremy. I'm Amber's husband and sitting in with this one.
But you did read the book.
I did read the book.
And you do sometimes run with us.
Yes.
I'm Katie. I run with the Monday group, and I, outside of running, am a librarian, so the store nicely lets me put together some book club questions and, you know, indulge my nerd side. So yeah, and if you haven't heard already, I apologize. I have allergies, so I'm sniffling a lot tonight.
Okay, my name is Carl Brandt. I knew Carl Harder from the mid-70s on. I moved from Madison to San Diego to open up Movin Shoes in San Diego in '77, just basically a month before the things that happened in this book happened. And yeah, I miss Carl, so.
Nina, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Lisa Norman. I know a bunch of you, and I run on Mondays and Thursday nights, or I did, with the group.
Okay. So I'm Nina Emerson, and I'm actually currently working part-time at Movin Shoes, and obviously run with the group and miss everybody and miss our runs and miss life before all of this COVID stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so Katie had asked me to kind of kick off a little bit by just kind of talking a little bit about Carl. And I suspect both Nina and Carl could contribute if they'd like. But the thing that after rereading the book that is most salient to me about Carl is like, he's just a people person and he knows people and like, people just like him. Like everybody just liked Carl. Maybe not everybody, but every time we went to get coffee or breakfast or lunch, like you can't go anywhere without somebody saying, "Hey, Carl, how's it going?" And like he knew what his barista's boyfriend was up to, and like he just knew people, and it's really evident. Like rereading through this, listening him talk about, you know, our former Governor Doyle and like Jim's perspective on this, and then the character that's called Liza, like Liza's perspective, it's evident to me that he spent a lot of time talking to Liza, and that was just Carl. Like he'll like hang out with the governor and hang out and talk to somebody who works at massage parlors, and like he just knows people. And I think that was a gift that he really had, to just see people. And it was fun to reread some of that and like see that again, even though it was hard to do. I miss him.
Yeah, so I have some questions that we've prepared to talk about with the book, but does anybody else want to share anything about Carl before we get started? And of course I'm sure he'll come up in the discussion as well. Great. So our first kind of question, and obviously we don't have to stick to these strictly or anything, but those of you that have been in this group before have known that we've read pretty much all like running or athletics related books. So we did Deanna Castor's book, and then we did Endurance, kind of about like the science of running, or things like hydration and things like that. And so this was our first sort of non-running book. So did anyone have thoughts on what did you think of reading sort of a true crime nonfiction instead of a running book? And how does this book compare to other books you usually read?
I think, I don't know if it was you, Katie, that mentioned that it might be hard to get our hands on the book, to find it.
Yeah.
So I went on to Audible, and I've never done an Audible book before. This is the first one. So I have to say, it was strange it was hard to listen to on Audible because there were some really graphic parts that were really quite disturbing. And if I were reading it with a book, I might skim some of that and not, but when you're listening to it, you hear all of it was really heavy. There were parts that were very heavy to listen to.
Yeah, that's a good point about the Audible. And I read it like as an electronic book, so I don't know. Does anyone know, did Carl narrate the audiobook or?
No.
Okay.
It was narrated by someone who's obviously never been to Wisconsin. A couple years ago when it was released, the audiobook was on sale for like $1.95 or something. So I just got a copy of it just for kicks. And like the author talks about the town of Stoughton. And there's a couple other towns that I can't think of, but like every time he would say Stoughton, it was like, so it was definitely not narrated by Carl. It was narrated by, I think the author did a mediocre job, or not the author, the reader did a mediocre job and just really didn't look into the names of towns.
Yeah.
Have any of you seen the movie that was made in this book?
Yes, I've seen it. I didn't think it was very good in comparison to the book at all. I personally thought it was really cheesy, and the acting was so-so. I mean, it was interesting to see the movie after I read the book, but I think that had it had a larger budget and better casting, it probably would have been a lot better. That's just my personal opinion about it.
And somebody told me, I haven't seen, oh, hey, Deb.
Hi. Hi, Deb. So, Carl, did you see the movie?
I have not.
Oh, okay. I think, Amber, you've seen it, haven't you?
I did. I saw the movie shortly after it was released, and it was not really an enjoyable film.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't remember a whole lot of the movie. I remember not liking it, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to pursue watching this again, just because, I don't know, felt like there was no need to, or no desire to see it again.
Yeah, the book, I think the book is much better.
It always is.
Yeah, usually it is.
Yeah.
So I have a quick question, you guys. Is the book based on fact? Is it factual, or is there some fiction? Did he add to it, or?
I think it's all factual.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that, like he says in the beginning, like he wasn't present for several of the conversations in the book, but he's kind of pieced things together the best he could through interviews and things like that. I mean, obviously there's some descriptions of like sex scenes and murder scenes and stuff like that he wasn't there for, but he did extensive interviews and research and pieced things together as best he could. but I don't think there's real, like, any embroidery in there.
So yeah, I guess maybe kind of talking about, you know, how Carl like went back and researched and wrote about each of these. I guess the book is interesting because they're not really characters in the fiction sense, because each of these people is a real person, even if some of them had pseudonyms. But the book centers around a few main characters like Barbara Hoffman, Jerry Davies, Harold Burge, and then of course Jim Doyle, who went on to become governor, and Don Eisenberg, who was Barbara's lawyer during the trial. And so, did you have any particular thoughts about each of these characters? And did you find any of them particularly sympathetic or unsympathetic?
Well, one of the things that was really striking to me is, like, it's easy to pick up this book and see, like, all of the pictures are in black and white, and, like, I don't know, I was born in 1980, so all of the, like, action besides the trial happened before I was born. But Davies is a family name for Jeremy. And so, like, as I picked up the book again, I was like, wait a minute, like, are you potentially related to this guy? Like, is this closer to home than I ever even realized?
Yeah, my family's from kind of that area, but I don't think related at all. But it is definitely a kind of a family name for us.
Yeah, and, like, for me, that just was, I don't know, this whole thing, like, literally happened close to home. I live in Madison and grew up here and was born, like, you know, kind of while this trial stuff was going down. But it just was this extra layer of, like, these guys are real people, right? I mean, obviously not folks that we've ever met or had any interaction with, but, like, these were people, even though they didn't have tons of friends and family. That just made it more relatable to me than I had, like, ever really experienced.
I thought it was very relatable because he gives like the location of where these murders take place, like the actual address on Park and the address on State Street. And so it's like, I'm like, okay, I just moved a young person into an apartment on State Street, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope it wasn't there. So then I Google it to find out where it was. It's like, oh yeah, that's my favorite restaurant. Well, won't be going there anymore. But yeah, you can definitely relate because he gives so many details.
Yeah, but I didn't feel like Jerry or Harold were, like, not sympathetic in any way. I don't know if anybody disagrees, but I feel like, especially those guys, Barbara's interesting as to whether or not she's, I don't know, she really doesn't say a whole lot to make herself sympathetic or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually felt kind of sorry for Jerry Davies because I think, well, obviously she used him, and I think he really thought that she loved him, and I think he loved her, and so I don't know if I call it sympathetic, but and perhaps maybe, but I definitely felt sorry for him. Whereas I didn't really feel sorry for, what was it, Harold Burge, the first guy she killed. I'm not saying that anybody deserved to be killed, but in my mind, he was a less of a sympathetic person than Jerry Davies. I just felt bad for him because I feel like he got pulled into it just because he was supposedly in this relationship with her, but I think that she just used him. So I felt kind of bad for him, and she was a very I don't think, I think she was a very calculating person. I think she was a very, very smart person and very calculating. And I think that it it was harder to feel sympathy towards her for me because she was so, she seemed kind of callous, calculating. Yeah. And I just, and she never really revealed herself. Like you said, Amber, she doesn't, and I think that that's, I mean, Carl wasn't able to write about that because I don't think there was much to reveal about her because she was such a closed, private person.
Did she end up spending the whole time in Tachita?
She's still there.
She's still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go and visit?
No, she doesn't. I don't think she accepts visitors, and I think, I don't know. I don't think in this book, but I've heard else. I don't know if I read it somewhere that she's never accepted an interview. She's never ever accepted an interview, so she doesn't want to talk about it. I mean, and think about it. It could be really salacious, actually. You know, it could be, you know, she could be almost like a, you know, a really, well, at any rate, she could garner a lot of attention to herself, but she has chosen not to speak about it at all, which I find also interesting.
Yeah, and I guess one thing too that I, read somewhere is that she was up for parole, I believe, for the first time in like the mid 90s and didn't, seek it out. And I don't know if there was something that just made her knew she'd be denied it, but that's interesting to me. That, yeah, and I don't know what that says. I guess in terms of some of the characters in the book, like I sort of struggled because when you read about like Davies especially, and like others were saying, like he's clearly being strung along by her and, he thinks they're going to get married and things like that. But like, then there's sort of this thing in the background of my mind that was like, okay, but, he and Harold both went to these massage parlors and kind of sought, the services they offered out. And, just like, I don't know what was going on inside them in the 70s, but just based on like the descriptions of some of the other people in the book, it doesn't seem like the women in them were treated very well. And so it's kind of odd because on one hand, like they're these very sort of sympathetic, lonely characters, but then there's this part of me that's like, well, wait, like instead of, maybe trying to form meaningful relationships, they went and sought out the services of these women and got super involved in them. And I guess that maybe makes it like a little bit harder for me because they did have sort of that undercurrent, I guess. So, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. That kind of, we were talking about like Barbara and how we don't necessarily even know much about her. And that kind of brings us to our next question. What do you think motivated Barbara to make the choices that she did? And what motivated Jerry Davies to go to the police station on Christmas Eve and tell them about the body out at the Tomahawk ski jump? Or sorry, the Black Hawk ski jump.
I don't know. I think money motivated her, greed almost. It seems.
Yeah, I mean, she used everybody around here. The number of people she fleeced who co-signed loans. I mean, they mentioned several, but I have a feeling that there are a whole lot that aren't mentioned that she, be they university professors or other people of note. Yeah, just give me the money.
Yeah, and I thought about that too, and there's a couple of things I think about there. Like obviously it was for the money, But when she at some point like was arrested, or when she sent in like that insurance check, like bank records say she has like $15. Is this like, did this all go to drugs? Like, and it seems like when she was working at Jan's, like it was kind of implied like drugs are just there for you. Like where did all of this money go? Was this, especially if she's making a whole bunch of money when she's working at the massage parlors, like there's a couple of points where it talks about, okay, well, at the time her taxes say she brought in 20 some $1,000s, and by like comparison, Jerry probably earned $10,000 that year. And like she probably earned an awful lot more than she reported for tax purposes. Where did it all go? But when we talk about motivation for Jerry, like going to the police, like as we read it, I started to wonder if he maybe has some differences or disabilities that like would have never been diagnosed in the 70s. I kind of wonder if he maybe is a little bit on the like autism or Asperger's spectrum. And I wonder if he just didn't, I mean, I guess who's equipped to deal with your fiance being like, hey, there's a dead guy, let's go move him, right? Come on, like nobody's really equipped to deal with that. But I just wonder if he maybe had some undiagnosed thing, and like he did what he thought was right by like going to the police, and like he didn't seem to think that after I go to the police, they're gonna do something, right? They're gonna think that Barbara did this. He seemed like genuinely surprised when the police wanted to put him under protective custody. So I think Jerry's motives was just like, I did this thing and like I need to fix it, and so I'm gonna go talk to the police and they're gonna help me fix it.
It's almost like a child would do, maybe he did have a much lower IQ than Barbara, because her IQ was quite high. And I'm suspecting, like you, Amber, something else was going on with him. Yeah, he wasn't fully functioning.
Yeah, and I think too it was excuse me, kind of interesting to see like how clearly he was sort of almost like under her spell, or however you want to put it, because he seemed to genuinely think that, oh, I'll go to the police and I'll tell them what happened, but like they're not gonna, indict Barbara or anything like that, because she told me that she didn't kill this guy and that she was being framed. And so he seemed just so convinced by her explanation, it was almost like he thought that the police would just believe that too, or something like that. And so that was really interesting to me. And so kind of going into like, I know we talked a little bit about the, where Barbara worked and things like that. But this book sort of describes a very different side of Madison than many of us know. So did you learn anything new about Madison reading this book, or was there anything that really surprised you?
Deb, it looks like you might be trying to talk, but I think you're on mute. I don't know if you're trying to say something.
Now, can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
So I moved to Madison around the time of the trial. I didn't know anything about it, but I do remember moving from Rhinelander to Madison and thinking it was a little seedy in some areas. I mean, it just seems so different now. I don't know. But thinking back, like the book brought back memories of like all that, like, like kind of like areas of town that were kind of shady and stuff like that. So I feel like, yeah, it just brought back memories. So.
So I moved from Madison in 77, a month before, so in November of 77. So is Madison, are you saying it's cleaner now? There is no shady undercurrent that exists?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there is, but I guess, I don't know. I guess it just brought back memories of how it's changed for me. So, and I don't know, I seem to think Madison's a pretty healthy, clean place to live. So maybe we've made it better somehow. I don't know. But there are areas of Madison I realize that, you know, can be kind of scary too. So.
I wonder too if like a lot of it just kind of depends on your context, because I moved to Madison after growing up in like the city of San Francisco, and so to me like it seems like very clean and like, you know, everything is so you know, it has a much kind of just lower crime rate, just I think because it's a smaller city probably. And so I always kind of wondered, like, for Barbara coming from this suburb of Chicago, it sounded like, you know, did she find Madison to be sort of seedier than what she was used to, or, you know, was she drawn in by certain aspects of that? That was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm curious how she went. I mean, she had the scholarship to Butler University in Indianapolis and went there for just 1 year. Is that correct? Or 1 or 2? I mean,
Yeah.
how did you choose to go to Madison after that? I mean, it's there are a lot of unknowns about the Barbara person in a whole lot of ways.
Right.
Well, and one of my big questions is she dropped out her last semester. Like she had 1 semester to go. And why would she do that?
Yeah. I mean, right.
For money? I don't know.
Which doesn't really make sense because I got the impression that her parents certainly had some money. And I think that her parents paid for Don Eisenberg, who would not have been, I mean, it's not like she had a public defender. She had a hired private attorney, and that cost money. So
Right.
it's, yeah, very, very interesting that, and maybe, you know what, maybe she had mental health issues, right? It's
I think that's clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
that, again, sort of like Jerry, were not diagnosed, not treated. Sometimes, you know, really smart people can also be on the spectrum, and also the fact that it was almost like it's almost like she was like a psychopath. Isn't that the type of criminal that doesn't have any remorse or?
I think that's a sociopath.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, what you
Yeah.
mean.
So maybe she was sociopathic because she seemed so calculating to me, at least, in terms of her behavior, and then engaging Jerry to help her get rid of the body. I mean, like all of it. So maybe that was part of what was going on with her.
And I think probably if a psychologist were to weigh in on it too, they would say, look at her past and say, she's got some sort of attachment disorder.
Oh,
because she's incapable of forming a true relationship with anyone. Yeah, something's wasn't right.
And she's engaging in a service that doesn't allow really emotional attachment. I mean, that's the whole point.
Right. And I think that's, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think she was probably good at what she did because she was able to disengage and not, and it was just physical to her. I don't know.
Well, and I think that's what, like, Amber and I kind of talked about this when we were writing the questions, like, makes it so interesting to people is it's it's sort of this trope of like, oh, this could be your daughter, because I think a lot of excuse me, a lot of times when you hear about women like in sex work, um, they've been forced to do it because they're dealing with poverty or drug addiction or something, where like this is their only way to provide for themselves. Whereas like Barbara, she had the middle class family, she had the college scholarship, she was on track for a very promising career. And so I think that's part of what makes it so interesting, was that she didn't turn to this work out of desperation, or she didn't try to scam the insurance companies out of desperation. It was almost seemed like she went for sort of the quick fix or something, in terms of, the life insurance policies and things like that. And I guess that's what is so interesting to me, is like, usually I feel like when there's a crime like this, it's motivated by wanting to care for a sick child, or you feel like there's no other way for you to make money. But she clearly had other ways to support herself rather than, trying to kill people for their life insurance money. And so I found that interesting.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah,
picked
and one of the
people,
Go ahead.
she picked people who were real loners themselves. So it wasn't, in a way, I think it made it a little bit easier to get away with. And it was probably easier for her to manipulate them, because they didn't have a large social circle. They didn't have other people. They were like running it by their friends saying, what do you think, what do you think about this? Or I think it was no mistake that her victims were also loners. And that was something that I think Carl wrote about, in particular about that Burge guy.
Yeah, and what I thought was like interesting is it seemed like, Nina, you mentioned, she's got these guys that are kind of loners that she's going to try and kill for their life insurance policy. And then there's a whole other class of men that are well connected. They're prominent businessmen, they're professors at UW, and she's kind of, I don't know, dating them or whatever, and getting these guys to co-sign on loans for her and basically extorting them. Because they are connected, it would be embarrassing for them if they didn't just give her that money. And Katie brought up, like, this could be your daughter. Like, all of these guys that were seeking services at these massage parlors aren't necessarily folks that you would expect to do that. And like, I'm not pointing any fingers, but it's like, that could be my husband. That could be my son. That, like, who are all of these guys going to do that? And like, who are all of these guys? Like, just normal dudes walking around. And like, I don't know. I think probably everybody has something going on under the surface. But I think most folks, there's something going on under the surface is like a lot less devious than a lot of this. And so, I don't know, it just makes me look at everybody like, what's really going on?
What do
So
you
you now look at everybody and wonder if they do that?
Or what they do, maybe not
Yes.
that, but like,
Who
what
knows?
are you doing?
Yes.
Okay, you're muted.
Oh,
There.
thank you. So I guess that kind of goes into sort of our next question about, so a lot of aspects, obviously, of the book and of Barbara's past involve like the seedier side of Madison, and, the sex work industry here. And one thing Amber and I talked about is, if the trial took place today, do you think the public or the jury would be more or less sympathetic to Barbara, just in terms of maybe how our views of sex work or the women that are involved in it have shifted since the 1970s, if they have at all? And then also, like, what did you think about maybe learning about some of these less visible parts of the city?
Well, I want to just speak about the latter part first, about what did I think about these seedier parts of the city. I moved here in '89, and I lived like 2 blocks from the Capitol. And I soon, and I think the Rising Sun was still on Main Street, and the Rising Sun I think was after this Jan's salon or Jan's parlor or whatever. So the Rising Sun, I heard, was a massage parlor that offered additional services. I don't know that for a fact, but and it was right on Main Street, like right before you get to the Capitol. And then if you kept going on Main Street, like right off of the Capitol, on the other side of the Capitol, before you get to St. Patrick's, there were a couple of apartment buildings that apparently were like, it was considered the red light district. And that was pretty surprising to me, because I mean, that was like really close to where I was living. And the courthouse, I was interning at the courthouse, and there was, so I was frequenting these areas. So it was interesting to know that there was this whole other world that was there that clearly existed, apart from what I was doing. And I didn't ever cross paths with any, like knowingly of anybody in line with that business, but it was right there, and people knew it, but I didn't feel threatened by it, and I didn't feel unsafe. The thing that surprised me in the book, and I don't know why it did, but the whole cocaine thing, and the guy who was like the dealer, gang, I don't know if he was a gang guy, but remember him? Like that for some reason that surprised me. I don't know why, but that part kind of surprised me. So.
Was that Ken Curtis? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was interesting how he made himself fit in the ritzy neighborhood, and
Yeah.
so
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's not really all that surprising that there are different worlds, and that we all are occupying the same physical world, where and we don't know about it, but I'm glad I don't know about it, because I don't.
right.
It's like what I don't know won't hurt me. But in terms of the massage parlor and that stuff, I did know about that. But again, I didn't feel unsafe because of it at all.
Yeah. It's been so long, I've kind of forgot about it until this book like resurfaced so many things, and I'm like, yeah, that happened, like,
Yeah.
so.
But I mean, wealthy neighborhoods, there's a very, very wealthy neighborhood out here, San Diego area, called Rancho Santa Fe. And I've had police tell me that at least 25% of the people that live there made their money illicitly through drugs.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, wealth is a curious thing, because it's how our society sort of gauges you and either accepts you or says you're not worthy. But there's a lot of people who, with ill-gotten gains, who have deemed themselves worthy just because they have money.
Right. True.
Yeah, I guess to kind of build on that, like, that's one thing that I thought about as I read this book is, I do think today, while sex work is still certainly like stigmatized, there is more of an understanding of the people that are performing the services are many times being exploited and are, you know, the ones most likely to have run-ins with the law or have drug issues, while the people who profit from them largely, you know, sort of get to be above the law. And so it sort of made me wonder if this was happening today, like, would they have looked more into Barbara's claims that she was being framed by someone? And I'm not saying like she was, but just, or would there be like more sympathy or something toward her? Because I think we do have a little more of an understanding about how people who work in those places are sort of treated.
Well, today it would be totally different, you guys, if it ever went to trial because of technology, you know, what exists as far as,
Yeah.
you know, the crime scene testing and this and that. Yeah, that stuff wasn't even really around back then. I mean, it was just by accident that they discovered the cyanide. That was just an accidental thing. Now, I don't think they'd miss that nowadays. I don't know, maybe they would.
But do you
Speaking of
think
cyanide,
people would? What's that,
speaking of
Carl?
cyanide, do you think that Burge accidentally poisoned himself by mistaking the cyanide for sugar when he put it in his coffee? Because why would he have 37 times the amount needed to kill a person? And if it's true that that's equal to approximately a teaspoon.
Right, and that was kind of the impression that I got, is that she ends up being convicted for murdering Burge, who she didn't really intentionally murder, but she intentionally murdered the Jerry. She intentionally murdered Jerry, but they couldn't prove it. So if that was the whole irony of it, is as I recall, because she got the cyanide, I think she was gonna kill Burge anyway. I'm certain, right? She was gonna kill him anyway, but I think he made it easier for her because he kind of killed himself,
Yeah.
right?
So
I think
wasn't
that I think that she initially was going to kill Burge, but then Davies came along and proved to be a more profitable target. She had a much bigger policy on Davies. So obviously we don't know, but I suspect she was initially going to kill Burge, and then Davies came along and then she decided to kill Davies instead. But Burge probably just wouldn't go away, or like caught on to something, or I don't know. Burge, I think she was going to kill him and then decided not to, and then did anyway. Or he accidentally killed himself and then she started smashing on him. But I think she changed plans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good question though, Amber. So even, let's say he did accidentally ingest that amount of cyanide, or even if she put it in his coffee, why was his body so beaten up?
I thought she hit him over the head though, too, with a frying pan.
Well, Carl's theory in the book, or was it Doyle's theory that Carl wrote about? I don't know. One of the theories was like he went over there and he was upset because the engagement was broken off, or I don't know, right? He was upset about something, came over, fixed himself some coffee, and like either like she wasn't paying attention or somehow he put sugar in his coffee, and then like he either figured out something was going on, or he was mad at her, or like he potentially like charged at her, and then she just started wailing on him.
Right.
It's a theory, like we don't really know, but that's what the book
didn't they suggest that at the end of the book? Because I'm like, oh yeah, that could have happened. So I hadn't even, I was, you know, I'm glad they said that because it could have happened too. So
Yeah, it was really, I think it was just the irony that it was that Burge died more accidentally, but they were able to prove that case, and they weren't able to prove Davy's case, and so she was just convicted of the one murder.
I'm curious if any of you know, especially Nina with your background in law, like if I just have deadly poison sitting in my house in a sugar dish and someone like without my knowledge consumes it and dies, like what's my responsibility towards that? I mean, I'm assuming it's not good, but
Wow.
don't worry, our sugar is sugar. If there's no cyanide in my house.
Let's just hope you have a really good home insurance policy in effect. Yeah, that's like a whole other, Zoom call. All the possible ramifications there. We could spin a lot of things out of that one, Amber.
There's no cyanide here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all going on the internet now.
Okay.
Yeah, sleep well tonight, Jeremy.
Don't drink the coffee.
But I am really curious, like how, I mean, there's no way to know, but like how this would have played out today, aside from technology and just like, I don't know, how she even, I'm not saying she didn't have opportunities, but at this time, women couldn't get a credit card without her husband or her dad or somebody like co-signing on it. Like there were less opportunities, and like, I don't know, I'm guessing even if she could just get her own credit card, that wouldn't have just solved all of her problems and caused her to not do terrible things. But I'm just curious how this would have gone down now.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Carl.
If she would have gotten, if her insurance scams would have played out the way she wished and would have gotten the $750,000 from the Davies character, I mean, would that have been the end of the story, or is the greed factor always, I want more? I mean, I don't understand. I understand greed to a little bit, but I don't understand where the limits are, how much is enough for some people.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I suspect, with the amount of people she supposedly extorted money from, the insurance payout probably wouldn't have been the end of things.
How many Quaaludes can you buy for $750,000?
No idea.
Do you know what's interesting though? She hasn't spoken since all these years since she's been in prison. The amount of money she could potentially have made, had she gotten out, taken parole. And I don't know, Nina, if she would be allowed, if she wrote a book, if she'd be allowed to keep the profits or not, but I meant.
Probably not if she was still in prison. I think that's pretty standard, but like I said, I also find it just interesting that she has not spoken about it since she's been incarcerated, because usually there's a certain amount of ego and desire for attention that people who commit crimes like that have to have, and she hasn't manifested that at all.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into like during the whole trial, like she didn't say anything except
Right.
at sentencing when she said, basically, I didn't do this. I don't remember what her exact words were, but I feel like that just like her not giving any interviews or anything to try and exonerate herself just really supports like what we saw of her. Like, she didn't, no interviews beforehand, like nothing.
Yeah.
Does anybody have thoughts on like why she was so silent and like why her family wasn't at the trial? I mean, her parents testified and perjured themselves, and that was a whole lot of fun. But besides that, like, nobody was there for her, which I don't know.
Do you think that her lawyer just thought it was too risky to have her speak? I mean, he might have just muted her, like, you're not going to say anything. I'm going to handle all of it, you know? So, because her lawyer had such an incredible ego, you know, and
Yeah.
so that's what I sort of thought. But then I'm like, you know, she just seemed like a cold person as well. She had no warmth to her that I could see through any of the book. So there was no warm side. So maybe she just was a cold person, and her lawyer could see that. And he's like, I can't portray that of her, you know, like, so he kept her quiet. I don't know.
Yeah.
The only
Then there's the other
time,
lawyer, the first lawyer that she called, who was a client of hers, the Al Mackey
Yeah.
guy, who knew he didn't have the skills necessary in this case.
Yeah.
But I mean, his life ended up being just horrific. He moved to California. That's just my phone.
Yeah.
He moves to California, ends up moving back to Madison, has a major stroke, and becomes seemingly a vegetable for whatever length of time left.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just a whole lot of sad about all of the characters in this.
Right.
but
Do
you
any of you guys-
mentioned, or no, Deb, you were talking about how cold Barbara seemed. The only exception I see to that is the like conversations she apparently has with her friend that we're calling Liza.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
those late night phone calls. That's the only time that, but maybe Liza's the only person who was willing to talk, right? Maybe Barbara was super bubbly and friendly with a bunch of people who just never said anything, but it seems like she talked to Liza.
Yeah, I agree. So I forgot about Liza. She was like her go-to person. So
So I guess, you know, we've kind of talked about like Barbara's family and how she acted during the trial. Do you have any theories about this case that weren't mentioned in the book or were different from the conclusions that were kind of presented in the trial?
I don't know about you all, but I have nothing else. Like, I have no other theories.
did you guys buy into the theory that, was it Jerry Davies committed suicide? Did you buy
No.
that?
No,
No.
no,
Yeah.
I think she killed him.
Yeah.
I think she definitely killed him.
Yeah.
But I just feel like for someone with Davies' like job or background or whatever, like to die by cyanide poisoning seemed like a very odd way.
Right.
If it was like, you know, not saying, I mean, not saying that he wasn't depressed or alone or anything, but that seemed like a very odd choice. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. So another one of our questions, just because so for me at least, reading, I was saying to Amber, it's kind of funny because like reading this book makes me miss being able to be out and about in Madison, which is not like normally something you would pick up on from a murder book. But like, do you think that reading this book as somebody who lives in or has lived in Madison is a different experience than if you lived in, say, Tennessee and you just picked it up from the library or something? Because
Well, it's definitely, I mean, at least for me, it was definitely felt more personal because, I mean, we all know Jim Doyle. And
Right.
I mean, I knew him when he was AG and Eisenberg and some of the judges that I was familiar with. And so it had, it, I think I could picture it more because I know like that main street where the massage parlor was. I mean, I knowing Madison and knowing the places that they talked about made it, for me, it made it more real. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't live here, then I'd have to be in my mind coming up with the images, which you know you do all the time when you read a book. But it's kind of cool that I mean that I knew these places and some of the characters, and that you know I mean Doyle's still alive, and so that kind of stuff I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah. It made it more riveting and more real. You know,
Mhm.
I came in late to the Zoom, but I would have never chosen this book in a million years to read. But I thought the world of Carl, and I am so impressed on what a great author he was. So I thought he did a really great job of portraying Madison and what it was like back then. So
It was really well researched.
yes,
It was really clear that he did so much research.
there was a
And
lot of detail.
that was I was really, really impressed by that. And all the people he interviewed. I mean, it must have been quite an undertaking. And I think he did a really great job.
Do you guys know, did Carl, when he was writing this, I'm just guessing he must have tried to reach out to her for an interview. Do you think?
So I asked Carl several years ago, like, so did you talk to Barbara about all of this? How's she feel about your book, right? How's Barbara feel about this book? And his only response was, she wasn't interested in talking to me. So I'm guessing my guess is he attempted to secure an interview and that attempt was a firm no, but he never like explicitly said, yes, I called her on these dates or I whatever, but he implied that he asked and it was a no
Interesting.
or a silence.
Did he write other books besides this one?
Yeah. Carl, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, he does have a novel that's published as well. The Skin Game, is that the name of it?
I believe it's called In This Skin.
In the
And if you
okay.
think Winter of Frozen Dreams is salacious, I haven't read the other one, but I've heard it's worse. I know over the years Carl's always been like working on books, but I believe those are the only two that have been published to my knowledge, but he was always writing.
Yeah, he came out to San Diego last year for 4 weeks and basically to write. So he was still writing, and he was planning on coming out this year for 6 weeks because the man really didn't like that winter stuff. And and just before that is when he passed away, the end of January.
So kind of continuing on that theme of, other pieces of writing, does anyone have a thought about like if you were going to write something about Madison, and it doesn't have to be a crime, but is there something you would want to write a book about or something you would want to research?
Katie, I'm wondering if you have an answer to this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. So I was thinking about this the other day, like, and I don't know, like, I like to eat. And so I think one thing that's interesting about Madison is that, like, it has a very, I guess you would say, like, diverse food scene than maybe what you would expect of a town of its size in sort of the Midwest. Like, I was thinking just about, like, the amount of sort of traditional delis that we have here.
Yeah.
And how that's not necessarily like something you associate with food in the Midwest. So I think something like that could be interesting.
So I think that it's the thing about this book is it's like the two Madisons, right? The nice happy one where everybody goes to college and we go to football games and hockey games and we wear red and go Badgers, but also sex dens and drugs and like really terrible things happening. I think to a lesser extent there's, or maybe it's a greater extent, I think there's still two Madisons, right? From what I hear from like minorities, they have a different experience of Madison than going to like Ultimate Frisbee games and Camp Randall. Like they have a different experience with discrimination and things like that that like I don't necessarily see firsthand. And I think something kind of exploring like the multiple layers, not just in Madison. I think that happens in a lot of cities, but I think I think that's a really interesting idea to look at how two different people can really experience like the same thing in really different ways.
Yeah, so just to kind of touch on that, it's interesting. So some of you know, like my husband and I are both teachers, not in Madison, but in the area. And we were talking about how a lot of students who go to La Follette High School, which is sort of on like the Madison Monona border, particularly students who are identified as having like learning differences and stuff, never get, you know, a chance at attending UW-Madison for college, and they live less than 5 miles from campus. And just how crazy that is, that there's such a divide. And so yeah, I think like Amber, that would be a really interesting thing to read about, would be just these different layers within the city.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think they still exist, but they've been pushed out, these areas. I mean, because I've only lived here 2 years, so I only know the square, you know, as a safe, inviting place where you can be out going to a concert at, you know, 11 o'clock at night and feel safe. There's lots of people around. But apparently, you know, in the not too distant past, like 20 years ago, the square wasn't really the safest of places to be at night. You know, things change, and now we still have areas like that, but they've been pushed out to other areas of the city. It's very, you know, there's a big divide in Madison, a big divide.
There's a big divide everywhere in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess just, you know, to kind of wrap up with our final question, and of course, if there's anything else you'd like to share, but besides like, you know, just a definitive confession or something, or explanation from Barbara, is there anything else you wish that you really could know about this case?
So I finished reading the book today, actually, and I like when I put it down, I had other things to do, but I'm like, gosh, I wonder what happened with her. Like, because when I finished the book, it said she was due up for parole in 1991, and wondered, was she paroled? Is she still there? What happened to her? Like, where is she? And then I was thinking, how old must she be now? Because wasn't how when she got sentenced, how old was she?
I remember it saying at some point, like right before before the jury selection happened, like I think she celebrated her 28th birthday, the
Okay,
day that, or like right around the time jury selection happened. So in
okay.
1980, she was 28.
So she'd be like in her mid 60s now, something like that. So,
67 or so.
yeah. Does anybody know what is she still in prison then, or I have no idea.
I think she is. I I want to think that I actually looked it up, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah.
But no, from what I can tell, or what I recall from when I more actively like was curious about that, is that she's still there. And I don't. I mean, I'm pretty sure she got life. Well, she got life in prison.
Right. And it almost sounds like she's just alone all the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And that she prefers it that way.
right.
Mhm.
Exactly. So,
Well,
yeah.
think about it, guys. If she was, sentenced in her 20s and she's been in prison, virtually isolation, she wouldn't know how to function, I don't think, in this world.
Right. Exactly. So, which is sad in itself. So,
I think before we wrap up, one of the things Katie and I had talked about is moving on for our next book. We're kind of accustomed to sitting down in person and kind of hashing out what we wanted to read through, but I'm curious if people want to make a return to like more running specific books, or if as a group we kind of want to look at things that maybe don't have such direct ties to running, and kind of how you guys are feeling about that. And Carl, you're welcome to join our any future discussions. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, I like reading. I'm part of a different other book club out here as well. So,
I wanted to thank you guys for choosing this book because, again, I would have never chosen to read this book. So I'm open to any topics you want to talk about. I love to run, but obviously, this was fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad that we had an opportunity to look through it. For me, and I think you knew Carl as well, it would be really nice if he were here chatting with us. But yeah, I kind of like taking a little pause from strictly running related books. I've read a bazillion running related books and I like them and they're great, but
Yeah.
I've been like wanting to read more like escapist books right now, just because there's so much going on, and I'm certainly tuned in and paying attention to what's happening in the world, but it's really nice to take an hour here and there and read sci-fi, or I don't know, something that I can just kind of chill out with. And I don't know if you guys are feeling the same way or want to more focus on our kind of topic at hand as part of a running group.
Well, you know what's been fun, you guys, the 2 books I've done with you, to have some sort of connection. Like this one, of course, the connection was Carl. That's a pretty big connection. But the first one, Dina Casters.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh,
that's
awesome.
from last February when Carl was out visiting San Diego.
Oh, that's really great. Thanks.
Very
cool. That's so neat. But like Dina Casters, remember that one? Let Your Mind Run. One of the members of our group that night at the book club, Mary Langley, she knew Dina very well, and she knew the people in the book that were meant. And so she gave us like an insight into, I mean, that's sort of fascinating when you have a connection, and it doesn't have to be about running, but it's sort of neat to have someone there. Yeah, I don't know if we can find somebody that's related to another book.
Yeah.
3 degrees of separation. You can find anybody.
Uh-huh.
I was actually thinking, and there are probably a lot of different ways to explore this topic, and it doesn't have to necessarily be like heavy, but I just am feeling the need to really look more at race, race in America, and the book that I read that was, I thought, fairly easy to read. So I'm thinking something maybe along these lines was Between the World and Me. Have you all heard of that book?
No.
What's it about,
Yeah.
Nita?
And the author's name I can't pronounce because it's a different. I'll look it up. It's called Between the World and Me, and it was so good. And the reason why I liked it, because he was explaining things. It's basically a letter that he's writing to his son, and what it's like. Here it is. What it's like to grow up Black in America. His name is Tanishi Coates, and it really opened up my eyes to looking at things in a way that, guess what? I've only looked at them through my white eyes, through my white upbringing, through my experience. And to hear his perspective was really, it really was moving for me. And so I wouldn't mind exploring that. And he's very, it was, a lot of it is, I mean, it was written really well. So I think it'd be interesting to read something like that. And obviously this book wasn't, like I said, like really heavy or like shaming white people, or, it was just really very illustrative about how he sees the world as a Black man. And it really affects how he interacts with people. And as a white woman, I don't see the world that way. And so it's not surprising that there are all these misunderstandings and problems, because a lot of it is not understanding and not knowing. And so because of that, I want to understand better, and I would like to know a little bit more so that I just have a better understanding of how other people live. And it could, like I said, be another book, and we couldn't all maybe do a little bit of research on our own, but I found that book really interesting.
So Nina, I'd like to, I don't know, throw out an idea that I had listening to you talk. It maybe isn't necessarily like a book like we're used to, but there's a man who used to be an editor for like Running Times, which is owned by Runner's World. His name is Mario Fraioli. And he does a podcast and then sends out this weekly email. And in the past, he'd always talked about like what's happening in marathons, and he's very critical of Bill Bowerman, or not Bill Bowerman, but the Bowerman Track Club, and all the allegations of drug use and doping. And he
Not
really
the Bowerman Track Club, the Oregon Project. Those are two different separate things. The Bowerman Track Club is Schumacher, and he deserves good.
Thank you for clarifying that, Carl. I appreciate it.
Some of those people are friends of mine, so yeah.
But Mario Fraioli's been very critical of a lot of stuff. And then I think it was shortly after Ahmaud Arbery was killed. It could have, I don't know, it could have been any of the other terrible things that happened prior to that. He did some introspection and decided, I have this platform. I have a gazillion people listening to my podcast and a gazillion people like reading my weekly email stuff, and I'm gonna start talking about some stuff. So he's been posting pieces about race. He's been expanding his podcast to interview people of color and their like take on being Black in America and being a runner. right? Some of the people he's interviewing are like professional athletes, and some of them are just like people like us who just go for runs and are also Black people in America. So if you guys would be interested, we could maybe pull from a series of articles or a series of podcasts, and maybe have like a set list of different articles that like maybe talk about race and like how it might relate to running, like in this sort of community that we have. I think that would be a little bit more to like pick through. You can't just say like, get this book. It's a list of 6 articles and 3 podcasts or something. But what would you guys think about making an adjustment like that?
Yeah, that's a thought.
Yeah, and I think maybe, yeah.
I know Mario fairly well, and I bet he'd even be willing to join in on a Zoom call.
Wow.
Okay.
That's cool.
That would be very cool.
Yeah.
That'd be very cool. Well, Amber, it sounds like that you're volunteering your
Might be a nice way to
work, so
some people that
Who
feel
are-
like they don't have time
who
to
am
read a
I
whole
to
book right
say,
now.
yeah, don't do that work and let us benefit from it? It's like, yeah.
That would be great. Hey guys, I have to run, but thank you so much, Katie and Amber, for doing this book group. This has been fun. It's great to see everybody
Great
tonight.
to see you, Lisa.
Yeah, nice
you
to meet you,
too.
Carl. Yeah, anyway, take care. Keep us posted on what's next. Sounds like you're up, Amber.
Yeah.
Bye, Lisa.
Yeah.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye, Lisa.
Carl, I'm guessing you found this through our Facebook event?
You are correct. Yes.
Okay. If you are interested in maybe,
I don't know how else do you promote it, or I mean, but is your email on Movin' Shoes website so I can email you my email?
no, but I can post something in the event, or we in just Jared will cut the last part of this conversation off. So once we wrap up, I can just tell you my email address if you want.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
But it sounds like that's something people are interested in. And so
Definitely.
I think we'll kind of nudge forward with this. I think that it's going to probably take a little bit more time than just saying like, here, read this book. So I don't know if we want to maybe talk about doing that as like our next event so that we have some more time to work on it and just picking a book in between. But I don't know, maybe that's something that we can talk about offline.
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Carl.
It is a pleasure to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
At one of these years, I will make my way back to the city of Madison.
Yay.
We'll be here.
Yeah. It's really quite nice in the
That's
summer
right,
for
because-
the most part.
Because you can't go anywhere else. That's none of us Americans can go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well,
In
I
high
look
school,
forward
we
to
read a
running
book
with
called
you all
Black Like
again.
Me.
No, I haven't read it.
It was a book about a white person who either chemically or cosmetically turned his skin dark and wandered around as a black person and wrote about his the things that he dealt with.
Isn't that
And,
from the 60s or 70s?
60s.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't even know the author's name anymore. But I don't know if it's still out there. But I mean, I read it in high school and it impacted me significantly. I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin,
Oh.
a lily white little place, which is no longer lily white.
Right.
But yeah. So I did not have many interactions with people of color, and I have more of that now. Last November, I went to Ethiopia and Eritrea with 2 of Meb's brothers. So if you know Meb Koflesgi, the U.S. marathoner guy. I've
Yeah,
known
we've
him ever
heard of
since high
him.
school, and I've known his family very well. Yeah, he's been around. But I went to Ethiopia and Eritrea with Howie and Aklilu.
Oh, fun.
And um, it was really interesting to watch them and a place which I knew. So yeah, the world is a big, wide, wonderful place out there.
Mhm.
Sorry. Yeah, maybe Amber and we can talk about getting some articles together and stuff like that, and figure out where we want to go next. And then we'll post about it in the Facebook group, or in the event, sorry, the Facebook event for this meeting. And so people can hopefully join us for the next one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Hey,
everybody.
thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
guys.
Bye.
Bye.